Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with this week's episode of the Market Monday. Hope you all had a fantastic new year and you can finish it off with a Market Monday. This week I'm going to continue the talk of Pauper because Pauper is all the rage. You want to follow the trends in Magic the Gathering, and I think that this is still a pretty much the Wild West of Magic the Gathering finance. We have a very defined standard at the moment. We have a modern that I am going to be talking about shortly here, because with the Modern being the Pro Tour being rivals over Ixalan, we are definitely going to want to check out paper prices for Modern as well as MTGO. I have been speccing into MTGO a lot more lately. I think that I'll start to tweet out more on Patreon for all those that are a patron of mine for my specific MTGO specs. I've specced into Spellcaller at 5. I think it's up to $8 at the moment. And I'll be selling off for between 10 and 11. And the funny thing is, I'll be selling it off to the exact same bots that I probably bought the number of Spellcallers from. So if you want to join me over at Patreon, I'll try to give some advice there. So if you're looking for more specific spec targets, that's probably the best place to get your information. But for this week, we are going to talk about Pauper as far as paper is concerned. Now, paper, it makes it a little bit difficult to sell because it doesn't. None of these cards rarely ever hit above the $2 or $3 mark, which is kind of the sweet spot you need to be to make it profitable on eBay or TCG Player. But nonetheless, this is still something that works in CardSphere. It also works if you have a local game store you can trade at, or if you're planning on going to like Grand Prix, or if you're planning on buy listing these cards after they do spike up in value. So first of all, my biggest tip for everyone that has a local game store is to go and just scour your bulk bin for cards that have any sort of Pauper metagame. Now, you want to find second sets and third sets when you go back in older sets, because the commons in second and third sets especially are a lot more rare than they are in first sets when first sets get opened and drafted a ton. Remember, the vast majority of commons enter into the field, into the marketplace, by being drafted. And the further back in time you go, the harder it is for you to find specific cards, because commons tend to get thrown away. And so, especially when you get a second and third set and people just didn't sort them out and they end up in bulk bins and whatnot, you can make some pretty good pennies on those specific trades. So for this week, my specific topic is me talking about double dipping in Pauper. What I mean by that is you want to look at cards that are not only used in Pauper, but used in other formats. And then you have the double demand, which will mean that the supply will outstretch the demand first. Now, there will be some other tricks and tips that I will teach you in the next weeks, but that'll be the focal point for this one. So first of all, scarcity is another thing we need to look at. Not all common cards are created equally. There's some cards on the Pauper list that are very, very scarce because they are only printed in like commander sets, or they were printed as a vintage master common on MTGO, and that makes it legal for the Pauper format because Pauper is balanced on MTGO. So the list of cards you can use is not based upon if it was ever a common in paper, it's as ever was a common on MTGO. So keep that in mind. There are cards like Hymn to Torak that are not legal because they've never been on MTGO as a common. So that gets a little bit tricky for paper, but there are cards like Ash Barrens that was only printed as a common in Commander 2016, I believe, or is it 2017? So the supply of those, they could have made that any rarity, and the supply would have remained the exact same. They could have made it mythic, and it would have been the exact same amount released for cards like Ash Barrens. I think that going forward, they are going to say the uncommons are in more than one deck. Commons are almost in every commander deck, and that's where then rares and mythics are just going to be in specific commander decks. But for now, for legality's sake, cards like Ash Barrens are legal in the Pauper meta. So those are always good to look at, just the sheer scarcity. If they're from extremely old sets, I tweeted out that I was investing a little bit in Gorilla Shaman as well as in the Holy Light. And you can follow me on Twitter, and every once in a while I will throw some market advice out there. But again, this one is going to be more specific towards cards that are used both in Pauper and in Modern, two of the formats that have stuck around, or what we call the eternal formats that don't rotate. And these cards eventually, if they do not get a reprint, will outstretch the supply. The demand will outstretch the supply. So why Pauper? If you've been following Twitter, if you've been looking at like Star City Games and over at like Channel Fireball, there have been a lot of people talking about this format. People like Learning Community College, other big YouTubers have been really tweeting and doing videos on Pauper Channel Fireball says they're testing the water. They're going to do it as side events, and they eventually want to pressure Wizards on doing a GP Pauper. And then Star City Games also has flirted around with the idea that maybe a Star City Open will be in the Pauper format. But so that's going to lead to some very good opportunities. People like the Pauper format because you can see that it's not really defined by one or two decks. The largest share of a deck right now is 11%. Keep in mind, though, this is still with hidden data. So if you look, Elves almost hits. Well, actually, there's been a few days that Elves have just been skipped. And even if you look at this Pauper challenge, you can see a lot of diverse decks here. So you have, a few duplicates, but for the most part, it's a pretty diverse little meta. So feelings aside, I'm not the biggest fan of Pauper. I did start getting into it a little bit more when I did realize that it can be brewed in. It's not so defined, or there aren't strategies. At first, when I started playing Pauper, I'm like, man, why would anyone play anything but this? There's particularly cards that are just more powerful than other cards. But then I really got to see the depth of the format, and there is some room for brewing and innovating. And I think the Pauper hasn't been completely solved, or isn't even. I think that it's the thing that a lot of people like about Pauper at the moment is the self-regulating format. So when one deck becomes the top tier deck, another deck comes to beat it out. So there is that rock, paper, scissors feel to this type of format. And that usually is what makes a very healthy format. And as far as finances speaking, you want those type of formats because there is never ever a top dog. And that means that Pauper players need to rotate decks. There'll be a lot of action between buying and selling. I think for MTG Finance, the worst case scenario is what we have in Standard right now. Standard has been an extremely defined format. Man, they just must have done a purge on information here on MTG Goldfish. But this Temur Energy had a ton of the bulk of the meta. At one point, if you added up all of the energy decks, they were over, I think, 70 or 75%, and then the other huge other chunk, like 15%, was ramming up, and then you had a couple with like 5% with like gifts and Marty vehicles and mono black aggro. So as far as what makes this bad for MTG Finance is everyone has already found the best deck, and they're not switching. Either they bought into Ramming Up Red, they bought into Temur Energy, they bought into Gift, and they don't switch back and forth between decks. If you actually look at the player base of some of these players that have the most amount of trophies, you'll see they've stuck to the same deck over and over and over. Where Pauper, the number one person that plays Pauper at the moment with the most trophies, is a person that plays a variety of Pauper decks. So that's what makes Pauper very, very interesting. So now that we're on to like a preamble of over almost 8 minutes, let's actually talk about the cards that hit the double dipping. So there, right off the bat, we'll just go down the list of the number one deck at the moment is Elves. And Elves has a lot of interesting cards because there are cards that are used in Legacy. We're not going to worry about Legacy, though, here at the moment, as I don't think that the demand from Legacy outstretches supply as quick as Modern. So Elves does have a lot of overlap. We have the Nettle Sentinel that is played in Elves, and we also have like cards like Llanowar Elves, as well as Elvish Mystic is also an option. Because this one, I don't know why they're running Fyndhorn Elves. It's just a more expensive Elvish Mystic. And Elvish Mystic is also legal because it was a common on MTGO, so it's also legal here. So a lot of these decks only want about 7 of these. It's overkill to be going more than them. You'll notice that this is quite frequent in Pauper, that there will be a lot of cards. Just think about like Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm. You have Opt, you have Serum Visions, and you also have Sleight of Hand. And of course, they're just going to use the more powerful of those, being Brainstorm, Ponder, and Preordain. And you rarely ever see the ones that are legal and Modern, like the Serum Visions and the Sleight of Hand. So that's good news for Modern and Pauper, that they don't overlap on some of those, that one format can pick up the ones that are banned in Modern or vice versa. So anyway, this one does have the Nettle Sentinel, which is used as a 4 of in most Modern and is also used in Legacy. And that is why this card has had a trajectory of going up. I think this one hit after this became a very legit deck in Modern with release of Origins. This is when the elf, the shaman of the pack, was released. It was in Origins, and then this spiked up in value. And you can see this is a pretty hefty little price tag for a common, as close back as what is this one? Eventide. So this is when they made Mythic. So I mean, it's not even that old in the scope of things. And it has reached $3. We've seen other commons hit the $6, $7, $8 mark. What's Simian Spirit Guide at these days? So if Pauper does take off, you can see some of those pre-Zendikar cards definitely go to the $3, $4, $5 marks. And that's why I think that it's worthwhile to really scour these lists. So Elvish Visionary is also used in Modern, but I think that the supply of this card is just way too high. It's been reprinted too many times that I don't think that this card can ever be worth more than like the 15 to 20 cent mark. If we keep going down the list of cards, there's, like I said, a ton of these are Legacy, like Land Grant. Lead the Stampede is another Modern played card, and it has I think it was first printed as an uncommon, then downshifted to a common, so keep that in mind that even though it does have 2 printings, it's not as highly printed as you would think. And I think Distant Melody every now and again sees playing a Sliver deck in Modern. So if we look at the sideboard, this is where we can find some really cool cards like Relic of Progenitus. So first of all, that if you haven't been speccing in a Relic of Progenitus, this is definitely one that I would put on your short list. I started buying it around here. It's kind of dried up. I don't think I've received many trades passed around, I would say the October, November mark, but I'm glad I got in. I usually got in around $1, $1.25, $1.50, and it's already up to $3.88. It's played like crazy in Pauper, and it's just a card that will continue to increase in value. So that's one that I like, because Relic of Progenitus does hate out some specific decks in Pauper. There are some graveyard-based decks. Every now and again, you'll have a Delve-based deck. You'll have some Tron that will try to keep recurring through Pulse of Marasa, and Relic breaks up their combo. So it's usually just a 1 or 2 of in the sideboard, because, again, the graveyard-based decks usually aren't the greatest threat. It can hit a lot of the cards that come back, the Undying cards as well, but a lot of times I don't think you want to be siding that in for that specific reason. So this is one that you're going to see a lot happen in the multiple Pauper decks, and things that hit multiple Pauper decks are a plus, even though it's just like a 1 of, and things that hit, of course, more ofs in Modern are also going to be very, very good to put on your spec list. So occasionally you'll see like a Gleeful Sabotage in Modern, usually not, because it's sorcery speed and people like to go more instant speed to destroy an artifact or enchantment. But Gleeful Sabotage is already spiked up in value to $5.22. It's from, what is this? This is not even that far back in Shadowmoor, and you can see that we had a lot of movement during the Oath of the Gatewatch to Kaladesh time period. So there must have been a lot of speculators. Someone was keeping their eye on Pauper, or it just hit its kind of critical mass where finally the supply outreached the demand. A lot of these cards that have value in Pauper will follow that trend. So Elves, there's not a lot of things that I would say are too interesting besides the Nettle Sentinel. I do want to warn people, though, about Nettle Sentinel, is I do think that it could be included in the Elves versus Inventors. That will be the last dual deck, so keep that in mind. I would not be investing in a lot of Elves until we do have the list of cards that are coming out in that deck. So Elves is not the exciting one, but Affinity is very exciting, because Affinity does have a card that has double demand as usually a 4 of, in the form of Thoughtcast. Even though Thoughtcast has been reprinted multiple times, it also sees Galvanic Blast, and Galvanic Blast is a card I've been very interested in for quite a while, because you can see that it did start to see that big increase down from 30 cents to 80 cents, almost up to $1, and has decreased back. And I think this is going to start to level off and go up. This card needs a reprint. If it doesn't see a reprint, Scars of Mirrodin, even though it was a heavily printed set, a first set, so I don't like to invest in a lot of things that are post Zendikar, which it is post Zendikar, and it's a first set, so it's a double no-no. But I do believe that Galvanic Blast, seeing play as a 4 of in both Modern decks and Affinity is often the number 1 played deck in Modern, and it's often the number 1 played deck in Pauper, but it also sees double Pauper. It sees it in the Kuldotha Boros, which is a different spin on Affinity. It's not quite Affinity. It's just an Artifact Matters deck, and also it does see play in the regular Affinity deck. And so Galvanic Blast is very interesting to me. So is Thoughtcast. Thoughtcast is a card that has hit upwards of $3.20 at one point, I think, when it just first came out. Let's see what the normal one hit before it was reprinted in the Modern Masters. Nope, it only hit up to $1. But you can see that this was, if it would have been reprinted in Modern Masters, this would have kept going up. It would have been a very expensive little common by that point. It's been printed in some dual decks. And then you can see that this one also has a lot of overlap in the Chromatic Star. This is another one you'll see in a lot of Pauper decks, and the Springleaf Drum, which is reprinted as an uncommon. So Springleaf Drum is another card that I do like. It was initially invested, a lot of people held on to it, and we have seen a little bit of a downturn in the player base, and I think that this, for the cards that were pre-invested at around this time period, just had some price correction during this time period, because what they should have seen is at rotation, this should have bottomed out to about this about 40-50 cents, because this was Born of the Gods, and then it sort of slowly went up, probably around Oath the Gatewatch, like the rest of them, and went from 40 cents to $1.30 or whatnot at that time period. So there's some price correction going to Springleaf Drum right now, but I do think the Springleaf Drum has probably found its flat line and is a good time to start investing back into it. We have the Chromatic Flare desperately needs a reprint. This card has seen up to $4. I wouldn't think that $5 is too far off. With this, it has had 2 printings in 10th edition and in the Time Spiral, and it's used in the Tron lists in Modern as well, so it does double dip. And then we have the Darksteel Citadel, which sees double play in the Affinity. It's also a very, very popular commander card, and it sees play in various other Pauper decks. It's normally only in this one, though. A lot of the other Artifact Matters decks don't even run the Darksteel Citadel. A little bit about Darksteel Citadel, too. It does have some demand from Frontier, if Frontier ever takes off, and this could have like the triple dipping of the Darksteel Citadel. So the Furnace and the Seed of Synod and the Tree of Tales, as well as the Ancient, whatever the white one is called, all those are kind of interesting as well. They're seen around $1 a piece. Tree of Tales is more interesting because it's 50 cents, and it's used. All of these are used as a 4 of in the deck. Look at this again. Here's a Relic of Progenitus. We have other cards like Feed the Clan, Ancient Grudge, Ray of Revelation that see play rarely in Modern, but they do see play nonetheless. And you'll even see some other cards like Dispel, but these cards have been printed so much. So cards also that are really interesting too is like the Hydro and Pyroblast, because they do have a hefty price tag. One thing you can do is you can kind of look at how MTG cards have been affected. And these cards are really, really expensive on MTG just because of first of all, there was no Ice Age, so the rarity of these cards is a lot more rare than in the real world in the paper market. But there's a lot of high demand in Pauper, and Pauper does have a lot of demand on MTG. So these ones, you could start speccing into cards just based upon that fact, that there is a lot of trends that have already occurred in MTG, and we can only assume that the paper trends will follow suit. But you got to keep in mind the markets are a little bit different just because the supply is not nearly as parallel as you would think, because some of these cards are a lot more rare on MTG, and some of these cards are a lot more rare in paper than they are on MTG. So anyway, let's go on to the next one, that is Burn. Burn also has a ton of overlap between the two formats. We have cards like Lava Spike and Lightning Bolt that see play in Modern, and then we have Magma Jet sees play every now and again, but Searing Blaze and Rift Bolt. So Rift Bolt, Searing Blaze, Lightning Bolt, and Lava Spike are all pretty much staples in the Modern Burn list. I have been speculating in Rift Bolt quite frequently. I've been getting these from anywhere from 15 to 25 cents. I've been targeting them for 20 cents for a while on cards, and then bumped up to 25 cents, and I've had tons of people send me them. And so I'm swimming in Rift Bolts because they did kind of bottom out for a little bit for Iconic Masters, but also this dual deck Mind versus Might. They were released in this one too. So they've had 2 reprintings. I think this was the 3 of in the deck too. So there's a lot of supply out there. But with Pauper Burn being very popular and Modern Burn being extremely popular, I think that Rift Bolts are going to start to stabilize off and then go back up in value. I think that they need. They were in the Iconic Masters as an uncommon, not a common, and we've seen that Iconic Masters is pretty much flatlined out in a lot of the more staple cards. So if you go down this list too, you also can find Molten Rain that sees a lot of play in Modern every now and again. It depends on the meta when Molten Rain sees play. A lot of people do prefer other deck or other land destruction, but Skirge has used Molten Rain in the past, and there have been some other decks that have just thrown it in. You have seen Smash, but usually people use Destructive Reveille, so it doesn't see the double dipping there. But a lot of these cards also see a lot of Legacy play, and so their supply is already quite low. A lot of the Legacy cards I'm a little bit more bearish on, though, because we have seen the Eternal Masters and Iconic Masters start to be stretched kind of thin of what kind of Legacy targets they can actually reprint. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see a Flame Rift or something like a Fire Blast get another print in some sort of box set or like another Masters-based set that are trying to target Legacy cards rather than Modern cards. So anyway, we'll go on to Boros. This one has some interesting cards too. We have the Thraben Inspector in here, and we also have Faithless Looting, Galvanic Blast, Lightning Bolt, which are all played pretty heavily in Modern. Thraben Inspector has started to see a lot more play in Modern. There's some mono-white human decks that run it, as well as some 5-color human decks that have done quite well. Recently, the Thraben Inspector is definitely an option. We've also seen this in Artifact Matters type decks in Modern. Just click on it here, and you can see that it does see play once again, like even Death and Taxes based decks. And again, I've seen it in some mono-white human decks that have done well, as well as some other human decks that have done well in the past. And so this card is just a 2-for-1. Usually you get an artifact you can sacrifice later down the road, and a 1/2 for 1 mana. So the value is just there, and Modern is just, our Pauper has just really enjoyed this card too, because then you can throw any one of your like the Galvanic Blast. You can go first turn, you can go an Ancient Den, and then a Thraben Inspector, and you can be almost there to then have the Galvanic Blast. This particular deck can throw it back with a Core Skyfisher or Glint Hawk, so it's just pure value there. If you go down the list, Journey to Nowhere every now and again is run in a few Modern decks. Oblivion Ring can see play every now and again. It's a very heavily played card in Commander, but has also been printed a ton. And we've seen Prophetic Prism seen play before in Modern, but it's usually like Crack Clan Ironworks decks. There's a lot of other egg decks that they don't use Prophetic Prism a lot of times because there's just a sheer amount of other egg type artifacts that are used. Let's click on Prophetic Prism to see if it does. See, yep, there isn't a Modern. It hasn't hit a Modern in a while, but it has seen play in Modern, so keep that in mind with a card like Prophetic Prism. Has been printed recently in Gate Crash as well. It's had some other printings in the not so distant past. But you can start to see a lot of trends. Lightning Bolt, Galvanic Blast, Faithless Loading. All of them are very, very heavily played in Modern. Then going down this list, you see Relic of Progenitus again, and nothing else too interesting. So next episode, we'll probably talk about the cards like the Gorilla Shamans and the even like the Standard Bearers or the Prismatic Strands. If you go back far enough, a lot of these cards can get quite pricey because they're old cards. They've just been rotting away. No one really sleeved or took care of the commons, and there's a lot of it's hard to find near mints of those type of cards. But again, that's a story for another day. So we go on to Boros, then we can go on to Izzet Delver. There's a lot of them here as well. This Spellsearch Sprite sees play every now and again in Fairies. The Fairy Miscreant is that as well. Delver Secrets hasn't seen play in Modern for quite some time. I think Fatal Push kind of put the end to Delver decks in Modern. A lot of people also just prefer Death Shadow or Gurmag Angler as better finishers, and if you go in some of the other colors, you saw like Tarmogoyf or Wild Nacatl, that seemed a little bit more consistent than Delver Secrets. Delver's a lot harder to set up in Modern. It's a lot easier in Legacy, of course, as well as in Pauper to not only protect, but also to set it up with cards like Brainstorm or Ponder and Preordain. So, but if this does see play again in Modern, there's 3 formats right there that are going to have high demand for Delver Secrets. Fairies, every now and again you'll see play in Modern, so everyone knows a person that plays Fairies, Bitter Blossom Fairies in Modern, and both of these tend to be, I know the spells, it depends on how they build it. Sometimes they don't have these cards, but a lot of times they do. This Sprite and the Fairy Miscreant, they're both very, very powerful, and they're powerful enough for Modern. So Lightning Bolt in here again. We have a Skirge. Skirge does see play in Modern, and it was a card that did start to see, now we are having problems. Maybe the Goldfish server went down here, but we'll continue to go down this list. And then you can go down here and you can see Relic of Progenitus is in this one as well. All right, so let's go on to this is the Tron list. The Tron list of the format is going to have all of the Tron lands are going to have the few other cards. I guess the server went down, so we're just have to go by tape here. So I'll just read down some of the other list that you can see. I've got some lists here so we have all the Urza's lands, and then we have in Stompy we have the Burning Emissary that sees play in a lot of 8-whack decks, as well as some of the Devotion-based decks in Modern. You have Utopia Sprawl that sees play in the there's a lot of Devotion-based decks use Utopia Sprawl. There's a lot of land destruction decks that try to go like first turn Utopia Sprawl. There's also the Tooth and Nail decks use Utopia Sprawl. And then there's also the Vault Skirge that sees play in Affinity, that sees play in the green Stompy list here. Then we have in this Enchantments deck, the Bogles, we have Utopia Sprawl. an Ethereal Armor, Slippery Bogle, Gladecover Scout, and Rancor. So a lot of those have a lot of overlap. I'm expecting Bogles to have a little bit of resurgence in Modern. I think it's really well placed for those Jeskai control decks. We're starting to see Jeskai control really take over Modern, and if that begins a trend, we're going to see the hexproof decks just beat up on those, because they are damage-based decks, and they're also utilizing their control-based cards like Path to Exile, Lightning Bolt, Electrickery, Cryptic Command, those type of stuff. And once you get a hexproof-based card, that can be kind of tough to lock them down. And Spellcaller a lot of times comes out too late. Geist St. Trap just doesn't attack in as well as it'd like. You're still going to have to, a lot of your removal spell does not hit versus it, and then you're going to have to try to get a threat down, and the threat is going to become outclassed by a lot of enchantments hooked up to a creature. So keep that in mind with the Bogles based deck, that we could see a huge resurgence. One of the other things that you could see a huge resurgence is it could go back to being a budget based deck. A lot of the cards have had a reprint, like the Core Spirit Dancer and the Daybreak Coronet, and now we have the Horizon Canopy, and a lot of the some of the other all the rest of the pieces are basically in this Pauper Bogles list. That's how cheap the deck is. Moving on to some of these other black control based decks, you see cards like Gurmag Angler that are used in that. We have cards like Mutagenic Growth that see play in Infect, Apostle's Blessings, Temur Battle Rage, and various decks do use the card of Night Whisper, which is played in this white-black deck. It's the Night Whisper is the 1 in a black that you can draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. So that's just kind of my spiel. There are still a lot of really good targets, I think, for a bunch of these cards. There are some cards that kind of make you shake your head of why they haven't gone up, because over the scope of things, like Delver's Secret's probably seen a lot less play than Vault Skirge, and I would say Innistrad probably has more supply out there than New Phyrexia. Yet Vault Skirge has never really had has never really gone up in value, and the same can be said for even cards like, I guess Searing Blaze did go up in value, but there's some in the I say post Zendikar that have never gone up as expected, and I think we're out far enough age wise that these cards are starting that the supply will outstretch them. Commons are a weird place, like I've stated multiple times in this video, where people just don't hold on to commons. I have a hard time finding any store that operates like the way that we operate at Gonro Games, where we really sort out everything and then sort out what I call, true bulk from bulk. Bulk is cards that may not be worth value, so there's going to be thrown in boxes and at least stored, whereas true bulk I'm going to try to get rid of. It's stuff I'm not worried about, stuff that if you watch the Gone Rovers, it's there in the left hand corner for people to pick through. I think that a lot of other stores, when they have host drafts or open boxes, they just throw all their comments in these boxes and then let people pick through them, or a lot of them get thrown away. You go to GPs, and a lot of times people that draft, they'll maybe pull out some uncommons, but they never care about their commons, and those just get and eventually that does hits the point where they become scarce. And pre-Zendikar, we've seen this. I think that almost every playable card pre-Zendikar has some sort of value if it's seen plays like a 3 of, a 4 of, even in Pauper at this rate. And whereas though that post-Zendikar, we even see stuff that has double 4 ofs in multiple formats that are still between that 15-20 cents, and it's just a matter of time. So I think New Phyrexian Innistrad, all of those cards are going to start seeing value, and it's going to take a little bit for like the after Khans of Tarkir, so the Gurmag Anglers type cards and the Temur Battle Rages to actually gain some value. But it's something I think you should definitely be aware of. Your best strategy is to go through your local game store's bulk bin. That's going to dry up the quickest. There's always going to be someone that's going to go and do that. I used to do that when I was dirt poor, living in Salt Lake. After I lost my collection, that's one of the ways I end up just going through bulk bins and finding cards like Martyrs, and a lot of commons that had value in Modern took off. I was able to find them and pay the 5-cent rate for them and then trade them up to people. And so this is going to give a very kind of crazy opportunity for Pauper. A lot of you might remember, or maybe you're actually post-Modern. I remember the craze when Modern became a serious format. The cards weren't very expensive, and then it was almost like overnight, cards just became very, very scarce and expensive. And I think we're going to see the exact same thing with Pauper. I'll leave this video though with a little bit of a disclaimer. For the Pauper format, some of these cards, a lot of these cards, are cards that are easily reprinted. Some of them do have key mechanics But if there is a card that does go over that $3, $4, $5 mark, be very, very careful. I think that any card that gets to the point where you can trade it for something more stable, you should. So you got to think of this as almost like free money when you're investing in it. It's stuff you want as throw-ins, or something you don't want to be paying a pretty penny at the moment. You need to be making like a 10 times multiplier just to I would say stay above the risk of it. Not only the risk of the fees killing you, but also of the reprint hitting. And just keep that in mind. I don't think that you should be spending a good deal of money or paying premium for these cards right about this time. So keep your eyes open for even more information from Channel Fireball, from Tulare Community College. I know he's already done 2 Pauper videos since he started tweeting about it. We've also seen a lot of other people like Adam Yurchik on TCG Player write a whole article about a Pauper primer. We've seen Channel Fireball start to talk about it. A lot of the pros have talked about their willingness to try the format out, and that's all a good sign as far as the finance is concerned. So definitely be looking next week. We'll look at the cards that I think have the low demand that we can get in on. These are cards like the Gorilla Shamans. I bought 100 Gorilla Shamans at, I think, between 15 and 20 cents. And I think that the going rate from now is probably a little bit higher than that. But all those like deals of getting 4 ofs or like I said, getting 96 of them for that rate and have them packaged on the TCG Player package are going to be harder and harder to come by, and that's when we'll finally see a price spike to those. I've also noticed a bunch of those are sold out of various like Star City Games and other ones, that some of these Pauper cards are starting to become scarce. So if you have any interesting information about that, definitely put it in the comment section below. And I apologize for the website going down. I might have lost my internet connection or whatnot, but I think this is still enough information to digest in one video. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.